Homework 8, Solving Quadratics Review. So this is a recap, basically, of every method that we've seen so far in this chapter. So I'm not going to do any of the ones on the front, because if I did one of each, I would basically end up doing the entire front half of the homework. So what I'm actually going to do is talk you through equation A for number 7 here, and then talk about which method might be the best one to use, and then we'll solve that one equation. All right, so equation A, finding the discriminants. Whenever the discriminant is mentioned, the formula is b squared minus 4ac, and that alone can give you a pretty good indication of which might be the best method to use. So b squared minus 4ac for this one right here, b is 4 squared, and then minus 4 times a, which is that negative 1 in front of the x squared, and then times c is the negative 11. All right, so we're going to simplify that down. 4 squared is 16, minus 4 times negative 1 is negative 4, times negative 11 is a positive 44. All right, so we get that. We end up with 16 minus 44, and then for each one of these, you need to make sure that you're actually, simplifying and doing the full subtraction. So this, we end up with a negative, 28, I believe? Yeah. Okay, so we end up with a negative 28. Whenever you have a negative number, it's automatically going to be imaginary because you'd have a negative under the square root. So the answer is 2 imaginary roots. Okay, and then you would do the same thing for each one of these. So you're going to have 4 different equations that need to be solved, and you've got 4 different methods that we can use. So in this homework, I want you to only use each one of these methods once. And so this one, if you look at it immediately, looking for something that multiplies to 11 and adds up to 4 isn't going to happen. So I would not use that one for factoring. Solving by taking square roots, this one's actually the easiest one to pick out. Remember, you can only use this method if there's no b term. Okay, so like this, the fact that you have a b term means you can't use square roots. And then completing the square in the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is basically going to be like whichever one is left, right? So completing the square, it's best used when this middle number is even, and if this number is just a 1, it's a lot easier that way because completing the square gets a little bit tricky when fractions end up getting involved, right? So if this is, or I should say this divided by this is an even number, then completing the square would be a good place to go. You want to kind of reserve the quadratic formula for something that doesn't nicely fit any of the other methods. All right, so I am going to choose to do completing the square for equation A, and we will recap that. Okay, so we had a 6-step process that we followed when we did completing the square. Very first thing you want to do is get whatever this constant is over to the other side of the equation. Okay, so we're going to add the 11 to both sides that we've got 11 right here. Second step is that this is supposed to be just a plain old x squared, nothing in front of it at all. So whatever value is there, we are going to divide both sides by whatever that number is. So we start with that, and then everything else is going to get simplified up. So we'd have a positive x squared, negative 4x equals a negative 11. And then we do the third step, which is the actual completing the square step. So remember, it works like this. We take whatever that number in the middle is. Let's hear it's a negative 4. We cut that number in half, and that gives us a negative 2. And then you take that number and you square it. Okay, so that gives us a 4. All right, so that magic number that we get when we do that completing the square step, which is this right here, we're going to take that value and add it to both sides of this equation. So x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals negative 11 plus 4. All right, next step is to factor the left-hand side down. So we've got x times x gives us the x squared, and then the value that multiplies to a positive 4 and adds to a negative 4 would be negative 2 and negative 2. So it's a repeat, and it always should be in this method, or else you did something in that last step wrong. And then combine the value on the right-hand side to a negative 7. And then your next step would be to take the square root of both sides and end up simplifying your values up. So take the square root. This, when I take the square root, I get just x minus 2. Whenever you're solving equations by taking square roots, always make sure your answer on the right-hand side starts with a plus or minus. The -7, you can split it into -1 times +7. -1 would bring out an I, and then the 7 is a prime number, so you can't actually take the square root at all. So remember, this would split into -1 times 7. So the square root of 7 is just square root of 7. Square root of -1 is I. So we've got I root 7. And then the only thing left to do there is to add the 2 to both sides of the equation. So I get x by itself. The 2 ended up added over to the right-hand side. And then I have plus or minus I root 7. And those are going to be your 2 values. So I am going to list this in set notation. You could write them out separately if you'd like. You can leave it in the plus or minus notation, whichever you prefer for your final answer.